Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our work session. It's Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, so we're 0202 to 022. So it's a good day to be in a work session. So excited to have you all here. We're going to do a quick roll call. Emily Secord let me know in advance. She was unable to be here this evening. So let's start with Pete Knox.
Here.
Thanks, Pete. Don Norden.
Here.
Thank you, Don. Emily Secord. Oh, duh. Sorry. Just told you guys she was going to be here. Okay, good. I'm glad I got my stupid mistake out of the way right in the beginning, so it won't happen for the rest of the meeting. Michelle Weber.
Here.
Gino Grimaldi.
Here.
And Susan Cox.
Here.
Thank you, everyone. So really quickly, my comments are just want to give a big thank you to majority of you on this call that attended the Transit Board Member Seminar from APTA, and that took place last week and this week. So we've already spent 4 hours today together, and we get to do a little bit more. But in all seriousness, I really appreciate everyone taking the time to just absorb and learn and interact with other transit board members from around the nation, ask questions, make just different connections. And so I think we all learned something. I know I did. And I had some good takeaways from that seminar. And hopefully, eventually we can do this in person and get to really strengthen those connections with other board members around the nation. So just huge thank you for participating in that, board members. Thank you. Mark, do you have any comments?
I don't. We have a full enough agenda tonight, so we'll just get on with it. Okay,
thanks, Mark. So I'm not seeing any additions from the agenda, but do board members have announcements they'd like to make? Okay, not seeing any. Whoa. Oh, I'm sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say it was very fun, Caitlin, to see you as a presenter last week in the little seminar. So good for you.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that recognition. It was really, so just for those that are on this call that are not sure what Susan's referring to, is that I talked about equity in transit and just spoke about some of the different things that LTD staff have implemented, including the Diversity Council and some of the changes that were made from the strategic business plan in terms of keeping an eye out for DEI in action within the agency. So really that kudos goes to LTD staff for doing the work, but I hope I represented you well. And all of the 80 plus people that attended were really appreciative of the work that LTD is doing. And even were pretty impressed that LTD had a actual definition for what equitable transit is. So that was neat to share. So any other announcements from board members? Okay, Camille, since we have audience participation, I would like to turn that part over to you, please.
Absolutely. And I will just do a quick ask to all who are in attendance. If you would like to provide public testimony this evening, please use the raise your hand indicator or press *9 on your phone. I'm just going to give it just a second to give anybody a chance to figure out their controls. And I am not showing anybody wishing they would like to provide testimony. So I will hand it back to you, Caitlin. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, Camille. Great. As Mark mentioned, we've got a pretty full agenda. I'm super excited to hear from TransPro tonight about the GM recruitment process. Tiffany is going to talk to us about redistricting. And it was pretty neat to see how she can get those how we can get those numbers so exact so we all have equal populations within our districts. And we also get to hear a lot about the service policy tonight. So looking forward to what we're about to hear. So welcome. I see Aaron. I see Mike. Oh, I see a new name that we've not met. Is it pronounced Chanel?
Yeah, Chanel Nichols.
Oh, great. Well, welcome. We're so excited to have you and meet you. So welcome TransPro team, and floor is yours, my friends.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Mike Setzer. I've been in attendance at most of your meetings, but I've stayed in the background and stayed pretty quiet. Aaron was steering the TransPro part of the process at that point. Now we're going to change a little bit. I'm going to step forward and steer the remaining part of the process, and Aaron's going to remain with us as a senior advisor and technical support and whatever else we look to him to contribute. Chanel Nichols is our full-time professional recruiter. So as we move into the recruiting phase, she will be very much involved with us, and you'll hear from her more and more as we proceed through the next few months. She's also in charge of a very important thing, which is advancing the slides for me. So Chanel, can I have the next slide? So let's just look at what we hope to get accomplished tonight. We'll touch on the project overview, which reminds us of where we are in the process. Then we'll spend some time wrapping up the core competencies, and I'm going to ask Aaron to handle that part since he's been in charge of that all along. Then we'll go to the job description recommendation from TransPro that flows from the work that we've done with stakeholders and employees and in listening to the members of the board. At the end of that discussion, we will ask you to concur with our recommended job description or to direct some changes to it, depending on your view of that. Then we'll touch on our recruiting strategy. No action is required at this point, it's just an informational piece, but we would also welcome any input on ways to improve that strategy. And then the second last step will also require some action, and that is we will present to you a recommendation for the compensation range, and we will ask for you also to either concur or direct some change to that. And then lastly, we'll just mention the upcoming steps that will occur in the next few months. So with that, let's go to the next slide, please. And this flow chart is how we keep track of where we are in the process. So we are about to move from the second box to the third box. We'll finish up our understanding of core competencies and credentials, and that will culminate in the job description that we'll ask you to judge, as well as the compensation analysis. Once we've done that, then we move into the recruitment strategy and outreach. And that's where Chanel and I get really active. I'm the practice leader for executive recruitment for TransPro, and Chanel's the full-time recruiter. And so we'll get more and more active as we step into that third box. The rest of it remains to be worked through the upcoming months, the gray boxes here that you see. But we're still looking for a mid-year completion and establishment of a new general manager, CEO. So, any questions or comments on process? Okay, let's move on to the next slide then, Chanel. And I'm going to ask Aaron to step in here and handle the next few slides. Aaron, it's all yours.
All right. Good afternoon, evening, everybody. Chanel, why don't you take us to the next one, please? Just a reminder that we've been through a process to really try and listen to a couple different points and triangulate those points to you to make sure we had a thorough understanding of both board's perspective, community stakeholders, as well as our employees. And so collected this information through a variety of both workshops, surveys, and what I guess we would call focus groups, and tried to pull out really key themes and trends identified there. And just want to compliment you all. In our experience in other searches around the country, it's really not that common to want to engage the community at the level of depth that you all did to gain that perspective. And I would define that as probably a better practice and something we would encourage future organizations to pursue. So we gave you kind of a progress report on this not too long ago. Not too much has changed, but we did put a finer point on it. And as Mike mentioned, you'll see hopefully words and themes reflected in the job description from this. Mark Johnson was my co-pilot on most, if not all, of the stakeholder meetings. So certainly could be a second set of ears and affirmation if you have any questions about what we heard through the course of the process. Go ahead and take us forward there, Chanel, please. So wanted to pull out kind of those key attributes, those key things that we really heard repeated as qualities of our next general manager and CEO, somebody who is engaging, a collaborator, really authentically in that spirit, somebody who enjoys the process of engaging members of the community and developing relationships to be able to get things done. Somebody that's flexible and adaptable. We heard maybe in alignment with that, experienced in managing change and things that we'll do with some of these key attributes while we'll also want to try and identify that as soundly as we can in the job description, starts to inform the kind of questions we might want to ask in an interview or two to ask them about their experience in managing change and things like that. Strong communicator and listener came up everywhere and in every possible way. That's somebody who not only has the ability to communicate the position, the vision, the intent, spirit, and purpose of the district, and also at the same time is able to listen to somebody and understand their ideas, be willing to bring those things back. It doesn't necessarily mean we're looking for a leader that's going to answer to every request and whim, but we're looking at somebody that's going to be purposeful and intentional in their engagement with people in the community. I already mentioned managing change, somebody who will be invested in the community and recognize that they serve a leadership role and engage that way. There's high value placed on strategic thinking, somebody who's really respectful of all perspectives, diversity within that being really, really key. Understands the resource that they'll be leading and the value it presents to the community. And then last but not least, maybe not necessarily a transportation professional, but fundamentally somebody that is passionate about transportation, understands its potential and impact on the future of the Lane County area, Eugene and Springfield. So we had 11 different discussions, 2 of them being employee focused, and a level of all kinds of community leaders, including mayors, representatives from the congressional district, a couple city managers, and different organizations in there. So these really came out as the strong themes from those discussions that we had. Any questions on this, or Mark, anything else you would want to add from that dialogue? All right, next slide, please. We conducted the survey, and really 2 things to see here. It was an open-ended survey, so the way we scan this is really try to identify those words that emerge most consistently through the survey feedback. So in the stakeholder interview, number 1, I've already told you this, communication being identified there, but you see other things emerging, innovative, transit experience being a positive, confident, approachable, good listener being tied to communication, somebody of high integrity that's honest, humble, able to potentially rebuild trust with the community as an identified priority. A lot of interest from the stakeholder level to be committed to the community. I think that there is a spirit that we take away from this of looking for a leader that's really going to invest and establish roots in our community, not necessarily somebody that's wanting to use this as a step up. And so that gives us something as we start to learn and evaluate about potential candidates, as Mike and Chanel dig into the recruitment process about the kind of person that we're looking for. Are we identifying somebody that's been someplace for 5 to 10 years, or are we talking to somebody who changes jobs every 3 years? That's going to influence, I think, our perspective on whether or not they're committed to us long term. And give us another click. And in the discussion with the employees, really similarly, go ahead, Chanel. Oh, sorry, back. Communication, again, our communication's desiring and understanding of where we're going, recognizing the value and being heard as members of the community, but good overlap, collaborative, a listener, focused on employee retention, empathetic, personable leader, understanding the values and the role and the contributions that our frontline workers bring, and a higher sense of importance and placement on the value of transit industry experience did come from the employee group. So that's something for us to be mindful of as we build credibility in the working relationship that we have with the people that make it possible for us to deliver our service. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think we're encouraged because these two things aren't misaligned. And if we all think about what we were looking for from our board and retreat discussions, I think, you know, this is pretty solid alignment, the quality and strength of a really high caliber leader with great communication skills, willing to be committed to our community. And if they happen to have some transit experience, I think those would be some strong background. So that's my 5-minute breakdown on our many hours of stakeholder session listening. Happy to answer any questions as Mike keeps taking us forward.
Okay, any further comments at this point? We're about ready to move into job description. Okay, Chanel, one more slide. So now we're going to move into the job description.
Hang on, Mike.
Oh, yeah.
Mike, Director Norden had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Director Norden.
Oh, I just noticed the increase in ridership part on the stakeholders one. That was a strong thing throughout your meetings with the community?
No, I mean, it came up. I think it's something that folks would expect to see growth in the system, that, you know, somebody that's demonstrated an ability to help a system grow its ridership was the experience that somebody was focusing on. We would also take them through the success outcomes that you all adopted as part of your strategic business plan. So in talking about that, you know, helping, we were asking questions in a way to help give us a sense of, you know, what do they think would be the most important thing for the next general manager to CEO focus on. So, you know, being a part of a helping grow ridership was an experience that they'd hope somebody would look for. Good question.
Okay.
Okay, anything further? Okay, so the next section we're going to move into is the job description. Of course, this is the product, or it's a product of that very commendable commitment you all made to consultation with the community and with the employees and with each other when it becomes operational now as we develop a job description. So Chanel, roll it forward one more, please. There are some key themes that we sort of distill out of that, out of all of that input that we had in your own discussion, that in my mind very clearly describes a certain kind of person. We know who we're looking for, and we can operationalize that by putting it into the job description. So these are the basic themes, and they really inform everything we're going to do from here on. I think you have a copy of the job description. It's a little more than 2 pages. And I'd like to gather your comments on that now in hopes that you'll concur with it at the end, and if not, if we need to change it, I want to hear about that too. So does everyone have one of those in front of you? It's about 2 pages plus another couple of paragraphs. And it's very much the same kind of language as you see here in the key themes, but converted into job description language. And it's very consistent with the input that you gathered from the employees and from the stakeholders.
Is it possible to put it on the screen to share?
I don't know that it is.
Oh, okay.
And if we did, it would be very small print.
You want me to give it a shot?
Sure. Let's see if we can do that.
Thank you.
Is there any theme music we can sing or play? Is that?
I've got a question for you while we're waiting.
Sure.
The trust issue. Could you expand upon that? It was a few slides ago, but talked about the
Yeah,
community wanting to rebuild trust.
Yeah, it
Aaron, do you want
was.
to handle it?
Yeah, I will. And again,
nice.
welcome Mark's voice to the conversation as well, as he sat in on a minimum. But it came up, I would say, in more than half of the stakeholder conversations, this idea that the district does have work to do in terms of being recognized as a trusting collaborative partner. I don't know what's necessarily behind that, but different organizations have their own different and unique experiences with the district. So, so maybe some things tied to a previous initiative and the quality of the communication that was done there, or did the district or the leadership of the district make commitments that weren't fulfilled? It was, again, I think it was tied specific to groups and their personal experiences, maybe at a community and civic level, to what was going on there. So it emerged enough that I think we felt like it was worth mentioning that somebody is going to be engaging with, broad spectrum of different types of organizations, and some of those organizations bring history of previous experience. So can we trust that person if they say they're going to do something, will they do it? And I think that's something that some of our key constituents and probably customer advocacy groups will be looking for.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, there is almost 95% of the job description on the screen now. And as I predicted, it's pretty small print.
Yeah.
I see Mr. Norden saying.
Director Norden?
Well, I've been going through this, and I've been reading so much of this material. There was probably another presentation that talked about the urban and rural thing, and they're defining characteristics of one of these things I read was saying it's a metropolitan issue for Eugene Springfield, but I wanted to emphasize that it included Lane County and the rural communities beyond. And I'm not seeing that in this particular spread of stuff in this one, but it was in something else that's in the presentation in another place.
Actually, Director Norden, if you look at the section on the lower right-hand corner of your screen, required qualifications, one of the required qualifications is familiar with working in urban and rural areas.
Oh, yes,
so
it's the very last item. I see it. Okay.
Yep. It will remind us to question people about that. Yes. Good catch. Thank you. Other questions or comments or suggestions?
Mr. Knox.
Director Knox?
Yes. Yeah, this is I can definitely see a running theme with this, and how the information you gathered from the stakeholders and employees has been kind of integrated here, and it's very much flows in a very specific direction of somebody who's got a lot of experience collaborating with a lot of different people and engaging, and yeah, I like it, and I think it really does mesh well with where I think people really were thinking about going with this.
Good. Director Cox?
Great. Thank you.
I know we've talked about not necessarily having this person be someone who is a current part of transportation, but then one of the things we also talk about in the slide before was being passionate about transportation. I'm curious about how do you balance that? How can someone be, how will you define if they're passionate about it, if it's something that they haven't had in their background or experience?
Well, I would answer that question. Well, I would ask about that with a likely candidate. Why do you care about it? What does it mean to you? And someone who wasn't specifically from the transit industry, but was perhaps from a social service environment, might have encountered transportation regularly as part of their challenge and part of their toolkit. And so they may feel strongly about it, even though they've never been involved in a bus system at all. For instance, I'll just give you a personal example. I volunteer with a workforce organization here in Cincinnati. And the thing we talk about more than anything else, the one thing we talk about more than any other one thing, is transportation. It's the major barrier for our clients to get to work. And that's just an example, but I can see somebody caring deeply about access to transportation, even though they've never been specifically inside a transit organization.
I guess to follow up, I certainly can understand your example of someone who's in social services, but if this is an executive from a corporation or company, they probably wouldn't have that same sort of, at least direct. So I'm just wondering how that balances out. I think it's a conundrum for you, but.
Right, that's a good point. That they might not, and if they didn't really have a passionate feel about it, that's such an important part of the values that you've set forth. I don't know that we would advance them for your consideration, but if there was somebody who was just tremendously qualified in other ways, but hadn't any transit experience, we might very well say, this is a person you should consider, and we recommend that you question them closely about how they see transportation and why it's important to them. It'll be very specific to the candidate. Other comments or questions? One of the things I like about all this is it clearly tells us who we're looking for in our search. And therefore, I think it clearly tells potential candidates whether they should pursue this opportunity or not by describing who we're looking for. And so somebody who's an introvert but a master of some technology should recognize that this is not the job for them. A person who's very community oriented and outward facing might say, yeah, this, even though I don't know how to write a schedule or change the brakes on a bus, this is a place that I might very well contribute. And so I like the clarity of it. Well, okay, if there's no further input on this, then I'd ask you to consider whether you want to concur with this and have us run with it going forward, or whether there's anything else that needs to change.
Mike, I'd love to hear from other board members, but I would like to just give my voice of support.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, I'd like to proceed with this. This looks good.
I also like it. I think it gives us a good goalpost, but we're not pinned in so far that we can't have some flexibility.
Yeah, just an additional comment. That's a good point. It's also going to be useful for you later on when you're looking at candidates to have a standard against which to compare each one of them.
As I said before, I like it.
Thank you.
I too support. I'm ready to go forward with this.
I concur. I think it's specific enough to answer what someone might question about applying, but it also has the flexibility and nuances to be broader than that. So I support it. Thank you.
All right, well, I'll take that as concurrence unless there's any further comment. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. It was good discussion. Let's move on then to the recruitment strategy. one more. There you go. Yeah, so the recruitment strategy is, this is just discussion at this point. We'd welcome any further input from you. We're going to describe, you can flip the slide, Chanel. We're going to describe the way we reach out to the marketplace to find some candidates. So we've now moved from that second box to that, well, partially. We still have to go to compensation analysis. But while we're on the job description, let's go to the recruitment strategy also. So there's really three prongs to this. On the left, there's personal relationships, or sometimes known as networking. One of the things that TransPro brings is that among the principles of TransPro, that we have a very broad network within the transit industry. So we will each begin working the phones with people that we know that might be interested or might know someone who is interested. And that's a very valuable resource for finding the right person. We'll also execute a social network strategy where Chanel particularly will be in charge of that. We'll use various talent pipelines and industry referrals to get the job out there before the industry and before people who might not think they're looking for a job right now, but might be very interested in this. And then lastly, we'll use an advertisement strategy where we'll use a lot of advertising channels, many of which you're probably already familiar with. These are the sort of the typical ones. This is a national search, so we want national media as well as regional media. Your perfect candidate may very well be in a very different part of the country. Again, we would recommend, you don't need to do anything on this other than be aware of it, but we're very open to any suggestions about how to broaden or improve the publication of the existence of this job. Okay, well, hearing none. And of course, if in the future, if it occurs to you that a particular venue would be a good place to post this job, we can always add something at any time in the future. Okay, Chanel, let's go on to the compensation analysis. So this is the other item where we'll need the board's concurrence, and perhaps this is the most detailed and complex one. So switch to the next page, if you will, Chanel. This is a process you've seen before, understanding what reasonable base compensation is, comparing it to your previous compensation model, and then establishing the expectations for the next GM so the candidates know what to expect. You've seen this before, just reminding you of it. Next slide, Chanel. One of the things we did based on the last discussion is that we removed from the consideration of data points for the establishing the range, we removed the public sector, nonprofit, non-transit positions in the region from our consideration. So we've got two other groups that we'll see in just a minute, but I just wanted to let you know that that's no longer part of the process of determining what a desirable compensation is. Chanel, why don't you move to the next slide? So we've got two different sources here. We've identified public transit peer organizations, and we can get detailed information from them because all of them are public agencies and compensation levels are published. So we've got some very detailed information there, which we'll share in a minute. We've also explored, though we don't have the same kind of detail, we've explored private sector transportation organizations, both regional ones and national ones, through knowledge and contacts that Aaron and I have in particular. Let's go to the next slide. These are the peer organizations that we've used to establish the range or to consider the range. And there's one of them that's an outlier. It's Santa Cruz at almost $400,000. We did not include them in the evaluation of what's an appropriate range for LTD. I'm not sure why it's that high, but it's just not just way out of the range of all the others. So you see the low. By the way, they're arranged across the bottom in order. So the low is 165,821. The average is 189,568, and the high of that group, $284,079. So that really describes the landscape of salaries in similar size systems focused in the northwest part of the country. On the next slide, you'll see what we developed as the likely range for private companies that were hiring general managers to serve in similar roles in the region in similar size systems. And we came up with 180,000 to 220,000 as the likely range in which we would hire. I used to work for one of the really big companies that did this, did many salary offers. Aaron also has lots of experience with hiring people in the private sector. The difference would be that the benefit and incentive side of the compensation plan would be heavier and the base salary would be smaller, but generally they'd still be in a range like this. So those are our two touch points for coming up with our recommendation, which I think is on the next slide. So our recommendation is that we begin with a range of $170,000 per year to $220,000 per year. And that amount comprises both base salary and whatever incentives, performance incentives that we might establish as we begin to form an offer to an individual a few months from now. This is directional. It helps us focus on the right kinds of candidates. If we get a candidate who looks really great and says, I wouldn't move for less than 350, we can just say, well, thank you very much. But it helps us not waste your time or the candidate's time on something that just can't be. It's, I would say it's directional and it's descriptive. If we had a absolutely perfect candidate who wouldn't do anything for less than 225,000, we're not going to toss them aside. We're going to come back and talk to you and say, this is one you might want to consider. Of course, the range remains entirely the board's prerogative. So I would welcome comments on this. Too high, too low, just right, change it some way.
Mike, can you just walk us through, to me, this looks right. We've, in the past, when we were looking at the past general manager's contract and her contract was up for renewal, we kind of went through the process of looking at comparable salaries. So this looks right to me. My question for you is, if we hired someone at 170, what are we sacrificing? That person is probably going to not have all the qualities that we're looking for. Like, in your experience, like, what are we giving up? Years of experience of someone in the industry, someone who said they won't stick around for a long time. What are we sacrificing?
Yeah, that's a good question, Chair Vargas. I'll be surprised if we do find somebody down near the lower end of the range, but it's possible. I think it would be, I'm speculating now, but I think it would be somebody new to the industry who has a lot of potential, but doesn't bring a lot of hands-on experience with the specifics. So you might find somebody who's great at the outreach functions, who's very outward facing, who is passionate about transportation, but doesn't yet know. And you might find that person so engaging that you'd want to bring them in, but you'd want to leave plenty of room to grow. I don't think that's likely, but it's a possibility.
I'll jump in. You might also find somebody that's in, I guess what I'll call a traditionally undervalued market. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's somebody in the, states in the Midwest tend to not compensate public employees at comparable levels, plus cost of living factored in. So 170 to somebody making 120 would be, a mind-blowing increase. And they could be at 120 today and have everything that we've ever wanted. So, it's going to depend on where they're coming from, that part of the country as well.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. It might also be a more junior person in a larger transit system for whom 170 is a nice step, and who brings a lot of the characteristics and a lot of the knowledge that we hope for.
Thank you for answering that. I think the reason I was asking that is I think we have to just figure out as a board, relative to what we want, like years of experience, we have to be willing to pay for that.
Yes, that's a very good point, Chair Vargas. I think everybody knows it's a seller's market when it comes to talent these days. Director Cox?
Sorry. Yeah.
I think this seems, very reasonable, and the scenarios that we're talking about are sort of unknown, but I think there's a lot of them. My question is, excuse me, I'm assuming that we would also cover transportation for relocating and those expenses as well, correct?
Yes, that would be my assumption too. There are a lot of fringe benefits that are not included in this, and relocation would be one of them. And that's so specific to the candidate. It may also involve a trip, a look-see trip before we make an offer. It might involve a family visit, any number of things. Other comments, questions? Director Weber?
I agree. I think the compensation range is good. And with our current model of base salary plus $25,000 incentive for achieving certain goals related to the strategic plan, I think we ought, we're adding some definite motivation there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Any other input or comments or questions? All right, Director Weber, is your hand still up, or is that from? Okay. Director Knox.
Appreciate your work here and the presentation in our last meeting where you went through this and narrowed down the range here. I think it's pretty logical. It makes sense to what we're trying to do, and I think I appreciate the earlier question about what we might be giving up for the lower end, but I have a feeling I agree that we're probably going to be looking at we're not going to be looking at many people at that level. So and because this is so close to our peer, the range of our peer group agencies, it looks like a good fit.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, others? All right, well, hearing none, it sounds like we have concurrence on this range. Again, it's directional for us. And if we discover out in the marketplace that it doesn't work for some reason, we'll certainly be back to you. I think it will work. I think it's wide enough to accommodate the people we're looking for. But we'll see once we get out there and start recruiting. Okay, Chanel, I think we can go to the next slide. So the next steps are to finalize the job description, or I'm sorry, that's not the next step. We just did that. In the marketing plan, we just discussed that. We will, in the month of February, initiate recruitment, meaning we'll get out on some channels, some advertising channels, we'll post the position, and we'll begin to see what the flow of recruits looks like and what kind of reaction we're getting. That's I'm excited about moving into that stage, because then you get to the real thing. So I think that's all we have for this evening, but we're ready to entertain any questions or comments. or any suggestions.
We've got about 5 minutes left on the agenda. If board members have any questions or comments. Okay, not seeing any. Thank you, Erin and Chanel and Mike, for your time. And Chanel, when you shared your screen, and a minute I looked down and it said 8:30. I went, oh my God. And then I realized you guys are East Coast time. So I'll say it every time, but we so appreciate you staying up late to join us and do the presentation. And also you have the cutest kids. So welcome to the gang. We're happy to have you. And thank you so much for the presentation, and board, thank you for giving your feedback on what was presented tonight. So I'm gonna switch gears and welcome Tiffany Edwards. This is actually just a brief presentation. We got about a little less than 10 minutes. Tiffany is gonna share with us about the redistricting process. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hello, board. Good to see you all. Can you all see my screen? Are you seeing the presentation? It's a slide that has my name on it. I can never tell. You see it? Okay. All right. So I'm back to just provide a really brief update and an overview on the LTD redistricting process that we're going to be conducting very soon. We now have rules finalized, and in fact, I think Camille updated your packet today because we got them, I think it was this morning, but they hadn't changed from the draft. So what you had in your original packet really wasn't different. It's just that they finalized them, so those are official. I don't need any decisions from you today. But ultimately the board is going to be asked to make a recommendation to the Secretary of State's office on a new map that reflects the proposed changes to the sub-district boundaries that will come in April. So I'm gonna just advance the slide here. Sorry, I'm ahead of myself. So this is a timeline of the process. If we kind of just work backwards from May, May 16th deadline to provide the Secretary of State with recommended maps and a written summary of our outreach efforts. There's just a number of things that need to happen. So as you may recall, I previously shared that we are working with LCOG, Lane County Council of Governments, on the technical work. So we've already made quite a bit of progress. We're going to be refining materials, and then we'll be publishing maps up to our website along with detailed descriptions of the proposed changes to each sub-district. Concurrently, our communications team is going to be putting out a press release, and we'll be doing some targeted outreach to stakeholder groups, neighborhood groups, whatnot, and invite them to weigh in either with written comments, which Camille will be receiving, or at a public hearing on March 16th at your regular board meeting. And we'll keep the public comment period open, and then I will be coming back to you in April at the April 20th board meeting to be summarizing all of that data that we collected and all of the input from the community, and then making a recommendation based on all of that. And we'll be asking for you to take a vote on a map at that point. So we do I have a little flexibility built in the event that we need to add a touch point to one of your board work sessions or whatnot, but we don't really anticipate anything kind of above and beyond the norm. So I've included language in the next slide here, that this was the language that was finalized by the Secretary of State in creating the rules for our process. And it's really straightforward. I would say, just say the most notable thing here is new language that incorporates values around diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which, as you all know, LTD prides itself in prioritizing that in all of that we do. So these, we will be incorporating those values and efforts in our written report, as well as summarizing that in our outreach plan. These rules really kind of just lay out what we need to do and what we'll need to be providing. Kind of talks about that. This is all in your packet. But it also includes what happens if for some reason the Secretary of State's office does not approve our maps. So essentially, they'd be remanding it back and tell us what the issue is, and they'd be asking us to fix it. So we have until July to really complete that whole process. The last thing I just wanted to share, this is the exciting part. There are a couple of maps that we have to share for you. This one is your current sub-district boundaries that are included here. And this also has the recent 2020 census information. So you'll see that sub-districts 3, 4, and 5 had significantly more population growth than some of the others. And so what that's going to mean is that we're going to need to move lines a little bit to redistribute the population more equally. I did include this in your packet, and it's a PDF, so you can kind of zoom in and it's not nearly as pixely and it's in better resolution. But the second map here, and this is a very rough draft. We're actually working to acquire a map that's similar to this one, but just can kind of overlay the way this has showing here. So this is showing the proposed boundaries, and those are in the orange, and it's overlaid with the current boundaries that are in the dark gray. So good news is we don't anticipate any changes to sub-districts that are going to impact any of your eligibility on the board based on where you all live. So that's the good news. I mean, everybody looks pretty safe within their sub-districts for these proposed maps. And then there is actually just one proposed change, which is going to propose putting the entire Harlow neighborhood into one sub-district. So that's actually a gain that would be a desirable outcome. So that's pretty much it. We will, like I said, we're going to be publishing all of this information to the website. We will be drilling down so that people can actually zoom in and see more detailed, specifics to the street detail to see, what sub-districts they might be reassigned to. But as you all know, I think it's probably not going to see a huge amount of people weighing in. I don't know, but I don't want to curse myself by saying that, but I just don't anticipate a whole lot of changes. So I see Gino has his hand up, and I can stop sharing, or if you want me,
if you could go back to the map, that'd be great.
You got it. Which one?
The one with the adjustments.
This one here?
Perfect.
Yeah.
So the District 1 boundary that's on the west, it follows some squiggly line. Is that some geographic line, or what is that?
That's a good question. I actually don't know. I without going super detailed into it, I think the way that they do the process, the GIS process that LCOG goes through, I mean, I think they kind of find streets, and maybe that might be a river. I actually really can't tell what that boundary is.
That's okay. It looks like,
yeah. Tom was going to join me if he's over here. He may know a little bit more as far as like actually what they were looking at for criteria. But I think, as they move lines around, the populations just kind of, I mean, I've worked with this type of software before, and it basically just kind of moves numbers around until they get to a point where they're really comparable.
Yeah,
I can just add quickly, Gino. They're going to be using a number of geographies, so census geography, tax lots, those types of things. I'd have to look further to see what that is. I really thought that the gray line was the river, and so so I don't think that's a river, but we'll answer that question for you the next time we talk about it.
And that's fine. Thanks.
All right.
Don, go ahead.
Well, last time you talked about this, you mentioned, or at least something, that there would be no changes in the taxing. Obviously, I'm on subject 3. When you look at all the other districts, we're picking up the people along the roads that are adjacent to it. But on subdistrict 3, we're eliminating. I mean, we've got all of that area in Dexter, Lowell, Enterprise Road, Pleasant Hill, that's all covered. But in South Lane County, you just have the urban, not the urban growth boundary, the actual city boundary.
City limits, yes.
Cottage Grove and Cresswell, but we're not serving at all the people up and down 99 Sears Road. The whole district, all the other districts are served. And so it seems, well, disappointing to me that all of these citizens of Lane County are disenfranchised by this map. It just isn't, it's never been fair.
Yeah, so Don, you're not talking necessarily about your individual sub-district boundary. You're talking about the overall taxing district. And that is a statute that is established by the legislature. At least that's been my understanding. That was what it was explained to me. So the taxing district has been established as these are the boundaries for that. Those are not changing in this process. I think the process to have those change is actually going to the legislature to have a change. And I'm not sure why, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to find out more information specifically about that. If that is something that
I can quickly explain a couple of things. Okay. One is, and Donna, I think you know this history, but Cresswell and Cottage Grove, originally, when the district was formed in 1970, opted out, and I actually wasn't there back then. I've been around for a long time, but not back that far. So I'm not sure exactly how that worked then, but it was the first time a transit district, we were one of two after Portland to do this. And so, Oak Ridge opted out, West Lane County opted out. There was all this process that went on. Well, fast forward to the 90s, I believe, and both Cresswell and Cottage Grove, within their city limits, held an election where the majority of people voted to be part of the district. And the proposal that they made was that it would not affect those areas outside of the city limits. And that's why you see the district boundary actually runs down the right-of-way of I-5. So there's really no private property within the boundary through that time. And that's the story as to how this happened. Whether it's right or wrong is a perspective, I guess.
Well, I know that story very well, but I'm also aware that these maps were drawn. I mean, essentially we left out Weyerhaeuser Corporation and GP Corporation, all of the lumber mills that didn't want to pay any tax. Now these people fought tooth and nail to avoid the transit district because they didn't want to pay payroll tax. And they essentially won because we could only vote within the city limits. And that was, we'd have to have joined Lane County. It would have been a huge mess to try to change the boundaries through the district change then. But it still seems like, well, all of these other entities in Lane County are paying this tax, but these big corporations on the outskirts of the communities are not paying the tax. And, the whole district is losing out on that. We're not getting as much revenue as we could. But then again, I guess it'll have to go to the legislature, and the ones who have the power are the ones who have the big purse. So, yeah, I guess I'm disappointed to see that it won't be adjusted at this point, but I hope at some point there's some discussion about this. Well, enough of that.
Well, are there any other questions? Like I mentioned, we're just working with this process. We're just working within the confines of the existing boundaries. And we're really just gonna be adjusting for population changes. A couple of your sub-districts wouldn't, like 7. I don't think Susan's would have any changes at all, but based on the draft, but if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, it looks like I'll be seeing you next month for public hearing.
And Tiffany, really quick, is there anything this board of directors can do to support your public outreach process?
That is a great question. I think what we'll be doing, and I've been communicating with Pat and his team, we are going to be following a similar process with our outreach to notifying folks that, like we did in for the general manager search, for the strategic planning process. We've been compiling those lists of stakeholders, and we'll just be making sure that they're aware that these maps are being considered, and asking folks to weigh in. And if they have any concerns specifically, we'd want to hear those from those stakeholder groups and individuals. But like I said, it's mostly neighborhoods and individual households that would be shifting which subdistrict they would be in. And most people probably don't know that they are already within a certain subdistrict. So, but thank you, Caitlin, for asking. And
yeah,
I'm sure we'll let you know if there's anything you can do. But at this point, I think we've got it covered.
That sounds great. Yeah, in the future, if there's ever opportunities for you and Pat, I'd say especially to get together some of our newer board members and make sure we're in alignment with who our heavy hitters are in our districts. And we're making sure that folks who are really civically engaged within our sub-district are in fact being communicated to. That might be just a good opportunity for board members. Like I said, get with maybe Pat, Tiffany, and Mark to just make sure we know who our constituents are and we know who we're communicating to. But thank you, Tiffany, for this. We really appreciate your time this evening, and
my pleasure.
We look forward to having you at our board meeting in just a few short weeks.
Awesome.
So board members, really quick, we have a quick change on our agenda. So first, we're actually going to be, right now we're going to work on the comprehensive operations analysis, and I believe Kim is coming over. So just heads up, if you are in your packet, go ahead and go to the comprehensive operations analysis that starts on page 79.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. We'll try to make it quick. I know we have another agenda item that Tom and myself will also be a part of. And so with that, I'm gonna kick it over to Tom to start the discussion about the beginning process of our fiscal 2024 to 26 comprehensive operations analysis.
Thanks, Kim. So real quickly, one of the things that the comprehensive operations analysis is really about is it's intended to be an ongoing rhythm, kind of part of the rhythm of the business, where every 3 years we're looking at what kinds of changes need to be made to the service to make it more productive, serve new areas, etc. The first, the Transit Tomorrow process really wasn't a COA, it was a service redesign process, and we're moving away from that. We want to move towards this more regular evaluation of our service, and so as Kim identified, we're looking at kicking that process off internally. We're starting to develop a scope of work, and Kim can kind of take you through more of how that process is going to work. But we want to start that process now in the context of trying to be prepared to address opportunities and constraints that might exist in a post-COVID type of situation. So with that, maybe Kim, you want to get into a little bit more of the details?
Sure. So as Tom mentioned, tonight is just the beginning process. We are in the midst of developing a scope of work. Some of it is taken from our previous effort, the COA effort, but some of it will be new, taking into account some of the new realities that we're facing, as well as lessons learned from the previous process. So we'll have the scope of work done within the next month or two, and we hope to go out to bid for a consultant with an RFP process. That'll take a few months. And then after that, once a consultant is on board, the analysis, the development process, we hope will start in earnest in late summer, early fall of 2022. And the whole process will take about 18 months, although, of course, timelines will shift probably. But if everything goes as planned, it'll be approximately 18-month process. And so that's why we are identifying this as the fiscal year 2024. So that would begin in July 1st, 2023. So, and then there will be many more opportunities for the board to be involved, as well as our other strategic planning committee and other public meeting bodies, as well as, of course, the communities and internal staff engagement as well. So this is just that beginning announcement process for you all. And with that, we're happy to take questions.
And Kim, you can just call on people directly.
Gino.
Yes. Looking forward to this process. I think it's a great thing to do, and I'm glad we're doing it every so many years. We're also involved in moving ahead, and we'll be making some decisions regarding moving ahead. How do we bring these two together in a way that makes the most sense?
Good question. I would characterize at a high level that moving ahead is like a capital improvement program in some respects. And so the initial decision making you're making will then kick off that additional kind of project development process, additional environmental work, of course. And that, as you know, takes several years to get into a place where we actually have something new on the ground. I would say, in fact, we probably, short of maybe some opportunistic improvements that we might be able to make along with the city of Eugene on different corridors, it wouldn't be an MX type of thing, enhanced transit types of things. We probably wouldn't see anything in the period of this COA. And so what we'll be looking at with respect to the COA is, we're going to go through this year is the next reiteration of the STIF funding process. And so we'll be developing STIF applications for funding that might help us increase our service, for example. But with respect to moving ahead, I guess that the key point is that at least in the near future, the two processes won't necessarily overlap. The bigger question is, well, when they do overlap, what is it going to look like? And I think that's where we'd be looking at. And you might recall in the process we've gone through for the other MX corridors, moving to a 10-minute service requires additional resources. And so that's how we would, that next COA that we do would be where we would start to look seriously at whether the community has moved forward with this and we're going forward with the construction, and maybe it's in one of the outer years that we plan to put that STIF funding into additional service on MX. And of course, then the COA is going to look at not just that MX, but it's also going to look at how that adjusts some of the other service around, for example, if it's on River Road, how some of that other service would look. So it wouldn't just be all MX, it might be some fixed route. So that's kind of how at a high level, how the coordination might look.
So I understand all that. One of the things I'm concerned about is that we'll be making some decisions on moving ahead fairly soon. And I believe when we make those decisions, we're really not only doing a capital decision, but we're making decisions about service enhancements.
Yes.
And I'm just concerned that if we do the COA, and let's say the COA says, well, we really should be doing something different in a different area, then we've gone down this road of starting the moving ahead process, and we have another process that is pointing us in a different direction.
Well, so I'll just say, speaking from the standpoint of staff, I mean, that's the COA process is going to recognize the fact that we're making this capital investment, and that we need to prepare and plan for that from an operational budgeting standpoint. And again, it might be stiff funding, it might be just regular payroll tax that allows us to fund that service. But that's, I mean, you make the capital investment, you make the operational commitment to that. I mean, that's how that's going to work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One last comment is that I would feel more comfortable if somehow we could, do the COA ahead of the moving ahead. But I don't know how that can happen, but it'd be a more comfortable decision.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things we can do in the COA is, I mean, it may be outside of the 3-year window, but we can start to look at preparing for that in this next upcoming COA process. And of course, that's all dependent on the decision making that's pending here over the next couple of months. But we can come back to you after that decision and be a little bit more, I think, concrete about how things can move forward. If
yeah,
that helps.
I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Sure. No other questions?
Is there more questions or comments? Well, Kim and Tom, I think it looks like we don't have more questions this time. Do you want to start on our next agenda item with the fixed route service policy?
Yes, yeah, we can do that. And we have the rest of our team tonight. So do you want me to kick that off now, Caitlin?
That'd be great, Tom.
Okay. So tonight, we're going to brief you on the work that we've been doing to update the agency's service policy. The service policy we have today was developed in 1999 and adopted by the board in 2000. As you'll hear from Dan Boyle, Kim, and Jeremy, the service policy is where the details reside related to the implementation and evaluation of our fixed route bus service, how we classify our service, how we evaluate the service on an ongoing basis, how we define concepts like productivity and coverage, and other technical processes we use for developing our plans for fixed route service are included in this policy. Since the policy was first developed, a number of things have changed that affect how we operate. We did not have MX back in 2000, even though we were talking about it. We had just completed the process that led to a better integration of our land use and regional transportation systems that allowed LTD to think differently about how we provide our service. And in 2012, LTD, Springfield, and Eugene adopted the frequent transit network, which identified where LTD would be operating 15-minute service, 15-minute or better service on several regional arterials. Tonight, we're going to provide you with an overview of the revised policy, starting first with an overview of national best practice in transit service policy provided by Dan Boyle, who has decades of experience in transit operations and planning policy. We will also have Kim providing an overview of the objectives of a service policy, and Jeremy's going to provide a quick overview on some of the key changes we'll be proposing in the update. I would stress that the key focus of the policy revisions have been to update the language to reflect some of the changes in our operations that I've referenced, adding clarity and more description to the existing policy language per national best practices that Dan will touch on. And beyond that, there are no substantive changes being proposed to the policy at this point. So I'll turn it over to Dan at this point.
Thank you, Tom, and good evening, everyone. A little bit of context here. The history of guidelines goes back to the 1970s service policies when agencies began receiving federal funding in the 60s. They realized it would be a good idea to be able to measure their performance so that they could identify trends and compare themselves to peer agencies. Federal Transit Administration now requires all agencies to have service policies and procedures to ensure that the service is not provided in a discriminatory fashion. We mentioned Title VI, that addresses that piece, and that goes back to the original funding. Next slide. Why have a service policy? Well, it's interesting. I was the manager of the most recent federal study, national study on service policies and guidelines in transit agencies. And one of the findings that jumped out at me was that the agencies that said they had a successful a procedure to handle service policies and guidelines to every single agency that reported themselves as being successful said they're successful because their board is involved. You know, Kim and Jeremy, excuse me, will be presenting a lot of details later. It's not necessary to know all these details, but it's important to understand how the procedure works. Really what we want to do is provide a transparent rationale for any service changes we're proposing and emphasize that it's based on objective data-based analysis. This helps us define our processes for the public and for our funding partners, the cities and others in the area. So with that, I will turn it to Kim to get into some of the details.
Great, thank you. It's great to have Dan as a nationally recognized expert in this field be part of this process. So I'm going to go through very quickly because I know we're hitting time here. It's a lot of detail, and so much of this is available in the board material packets that were provided to you. It's probably more detailed than you would generally get, but we want to hopefully after this give you a general understanding that there's a lot of components and factors that go into putting out service. And so I'll just hit some of the highlights of what typically transit agencies have going into their service policies. So as Dan mentioned, it provides a framework for policy making and putting out transit service planning. It defines service expectations and identifies evaluation standards and remedial action. And as Tom mentioned, this has been our guiding document for the past 20 plus years. And so this update is really just to bring that document up to current national best practices and provide clarifications. So our bus routing system is generally guided by industry accepted network design principles. At its core, it's about allocating the scarce resources that we have, whether it's in staff, funding, other shortages. And so we talk about balancing transit equity and geographic coverage. Productivity is essentially trying to get as many riders onto our system as much as possible. And so that is usually done by making the buses run frequently on our major corridors, going through the densest part of the urban core, and where riders can easily get to walk to and from the bus stop, and that the routes are linear and continuous. Whereas for geographic coverage, it's usually characterized by routes that try to serve as many neighborhoods as possible. And the productivity and coverage conversations are usually expressed as a ratio. So for instance, 80% of service allocated to productive routes and 20% service allocated to coverage, or 75-25. It varies with each agency, so there's not really a right or wrong answer. The service policy also identifies the types of route in the network, and each type has different expectations of service. So in our case, for instance, MX, we would expect it to be running very frequently on our major streets, whereas the community or our rural routes would be run much less frequently, but they still provide that insurance against isolation for our community members. And I'll go through very quickly the next few slides. And again, I want to emphasize that all this information is in the service policy documents. So there are factors that are considered when we put out service. Productivity, I've mentioned the span of service is the hours of service that the buses run each day. So for instance, on this table here, you can see that our MX service, we would expect it to run from 5 a.m. to 1 a.m. every day on the weekdays, and so on. Frequency is how often the bus would run. There's a number of factors that also go into route scheduling. So things like maintaining the clock face headway so that it's easy for our customers to remember when the bus comes. You know, it'll come every 10 minutes, it'll come every 20 minutes, and so on. And then providing adequate recovery time to compensate for those changes in running time, and then to give our bus operators a short break. For route design, we want to provide two-way routes between terminals that are major destinations so that there are people on the bus riding in and riding out, you know, for instance, from Eugene Station in downtown to Target or Walmart. And then trying to avoid loops and route deviations. Customer safety and comfort is very important to us. And so we have standards that guide how far apart the bus stops should be placed, what kind of amenities are located at those stops, where the stops are located at intersections for safety and operations, safety operations and bus performance. In terms of the service policy also stipulates standards for the types of vehicles assigned to each route. So, you know, are we going to put a 60-foot bus versus or a 40-footer based on the number of customers on the bus? Service reliability is very important because that's how we would attract and retain riders. So we need to ensure that the buses arrive on time at their stops, and that's called on-time performance. We want to make sure that customers are not missing their trips, or there aren't too many road calls for the buses to stop in the middle of their service because of, you know, a malfunction or whatnot. The service policy lays out how we do service changes, and then evaluating and providing recommendations for the type of changes. So we do 3 service changes per year, but during the fall bid is when we make the major service changes. And then new service would be provided based on the availability of resources, funding, staff, fleet, and so on, and also expected ridership productivity and how the new service would integrate into the existing network. And then in some instances, we may need to reduce service. And so service policy would also provide steps that would need to be considered when reducing service. And so we'd factor things like on-time performance issues and current or expected ridership patterns. So I basically went through a lot of information in these past slides here. I want to pause there to see if you all have any questions before Jeremy jumps into summarizing the current and proposed changes to our service policy. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Jeremy.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for having me and us for this part of the meeting. So the summary changes, this is going to be a sprint just because we're pressed for time, but there's 5 key components to the service policy. There's network design, service evaluation procedures, the disparate impact policy, or Title VI policy for LTD, and the appendices. In network design, one of the main changes was the change in service allocation. Currently, we are at 75 productivity, 20% coverage, and 5% discretionary. We've simplified that to 75-25 ratio. That 5% discretionary generally went to coverage service anyways, so we've just combined those. We changed the route types to conform with how our service is now as opposed to 20 years ago. Next slide, please. We have added some of the peak periods of service, span of service, and frequency tables that Ken showed earlier. And I should mention that all these changes, a detailed list of changes in your board packet, so you can look at what sections have changed in the policy and where those changes are located, so it's easier to find. Apologies. Route scheduling modified just briefly to clarify some of the scheduling concepts. Next slide. Route design and deviations changed very little. We moved the calculations for our route deviations where we would add a loop based on a request for service. We've moved those calculations to the appendices just for readability. Next slide, please. We have expanded the stop location and stop spacing transit amenities and bus stop characteristics sections to include more information for the public and decision makers so that people understand more why bus stops are sited where they are at and the reasons behind those. The spacing based on the type of route that it is and the frequency, and where we would put amenities and based on what type of service. So MX has different type of transit amenities than just a regular bus stop. Next slide. The service capacity and reliability section, has not changed. It changed very little, just based on some real light language changes. Next slide. The service evaluation and service changes sections, these encompass the biggest expansion in the service policy. And again, these are not substantive changes to the policy, as Tom mentioned. These are, we basically provided for transparency the steps that we already go through when we're dealing with service changes in the fall bid, which are generally significant changes, and what we would do in winter and summer bid changes, which are generally more minor service changes. We also combined some of the substandard service definitions in the adopted policy and consolidated them into one spot. Next slide. New service increases and reduction. Again, same kind of expansion and clarification just for transparency. We laid out the steps that we would follow and the guidelines that we follow for implementing new service or doing service reduction. So we've also added a definition of what a tripper service is, which is a short piece of work that to cover an overload or construction or something else. Next slide. The disparate impact policy or Title VI policy, this is the policy that deals with the federal discrimination laws. This has not changed aside from changing a 4/5 rule to an 80% rule just for readability. And we've added a reference for Ordinance 53, which is our fair policy. Next slide. The appendices is also one of our major expansions in the policy. We've consolidated some of our other services that are not fixed route into this section to talk about our special event service, the FDA charter policy, contracted service. And we've also included the methodology that we use to calculate our service calculation, so our service allocation. So the 75% to productivity and our 25% to coverage. This is how we make those calculations. And again, the route deviation has moved to the end of the document as well. And with that, I'll hand it to Kim for questions.
Yeah, I recognize that we've covered a lot of information in a very short period of time. And so as a next step, we hope that you will take some time to read through the documents that are provided, and then we'll return to you in your regular board meeting on the 16th and give some more time for Q&A. But in the meantime, any questions, feedback would be reflected in the finalized documents. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
Any questions for Kim and Jeremy and Daniel? And it's we're going to go a few minutes over, but by not by too much. It should be fine. Oh, Pete, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. I didn't quite catch in reading the document or your presentation when you guys had hoped to get this all finalized.
18 months.
Based on conversations tonight, we will finalize it and then have it be up for your adoption on February 16th. And then once that's adopted, then that would be considered the next, 2022 document of the service policy.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much. If anything occurs to you, let us know. And again, as Kim mentioned, we'll have time on the next agenda to have some more Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you, Tom, for that. And Jeremy and Kim and Daniel, thank you for being here this evening. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. All right. Anything else before these folks hop off? And we'll go to our last agenda item. Okay, so we are going to move on to our final agenda item of the evening. And this is a new agenda item that's added to work sessions. So this is the item for action or information at a future meeting. Dawn, I will turn it over to you.
Yes, there's a couple of items, but mostly I just wanted to be able to explore that relationship between the board and the general counsel, and also to explore the not redefine, but define again for me perhaps how the serial conversation goes with deliberations. This confuses me because I brought this up before and there was a question about doing it. And then we didn't have it on the agenda. And then I started asking other board members if there were any concerns. And then we kind of got into the situation of, well, is this serial communication? Is this a deliberation on an item? And I felt like, well, if it's not on the agenda, it's not something that we are deliberating about. But so I need some clarification on that, and also some clarification on what the role between the board and the general counsel is, and how the general counsel is contracted, or if the board is involved at all in contracting with the general counsel. So I felt like that needs to be some discussion about that, and I would like to see that appear on a further future agenda item.
So let me weigh in here. So Dawn, on the serial communication thing, I think we can have another training around that with, with our attorney or SDAO. And, that will, I mean, it's probably good for everybody to be involved in that, so they understand the rules of engagement when it comes to public meetings, right? And things that are going to come up for a vote. And so, certainly we can, have that, whenever we can get it scheduled to deal with that, if that's acceptable. And then, so the other thing and the other thing is about the attorney board relationship.
Well, yes, it just, because of the nature of the change of our general counsel, we've had a general counsel for decades before, and then there was change, but it was changed abruptly and in such a way that, well, it was defined. I mean, Kalina kind of came and gave us all the details of how this could happen in that time frame. We all went through that, but it still seems like perhaps a different policy is necessary, or not, maybe not a different policy, but a different clarification of the policy, so that we're comfortable with the change of our general counsel, the way it, well, not the way it happened, but the way it would happen next time if it ever happens again. And I don't know if that can be resolved right now. I mean, well,
so Dawn, just so you know what's happening in that regard, and again, with the bylaws subcommittee, they're looking at policies. And one of the things we are doing is changing the policy, the procurement policy, to address how the contract with the general counsel will be handled going forward, and that the board will be involved in decisions regarding the general counsel contract.
Well, thank you. I just need a little more discussion about it to feel comfortable with it, and that will be sufficient for me at this point.
Susan, did you want to respond? I saw you nodding as Mark was talking about that.
Yes. I appreciate, Mark talking about the fact that this is something that we've been talking about during the bylaws changes and as we're going through that process. And that's, we're having a meeting on Monday, which we'll be talking about that as well as other regulations. But, when this whole thing happened and I realized that, we're going backwards here with regard to process, but there was there was an emergency which required something happening outside of what is ordinary. So I do support, the idea that Don's talking about, that there be some clarification about moving forward. I know that's something that I had asked to have put on an agenda before as well. So I support, what my colleague Don is saying with regard to, I agree with that as well. So thank you.
So Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, would the next step to be call for a vote of this board if they would like to put that item on the agenda?
Yeah, the board needs to vote on board recommend future agenda items, and so this would be would do that. And it looks like Michelle has a question.
Yeah, Michelle.
Before we move forward on this, I guess my question is, what are we really looking to accomplish by putting this on the future agenda? What's our goal? Because continuing to recycle this conversation based on history, which we were all, we all have our own feelings about, I don't think it doesn't benefit the district, and I think it gets in the way of our most important focus right now is our general manager search. So if I'm being asked to have this conversation, I guess I'd really like to have a good understanding as to why I'm being asked to have this conversation again.
Dawn and Susan, do either of you wish to respond to that?
Well,
Susan,
I'd like to, excuse me, Susan, you want to go first? Or
I was just going to say, I guess I'm also a little bit confused about the process. So the whole board has to vote on an item to be put onto the agenda. I didn't realize that was part of the process. So I'm glad to understand that better. But I'm not saying that we rehash what happened in the historical perspective. I'm talking about, as we move forward, how is the preferred way with regard to this process? My understanding is before there's always been an RFP. Part of this is, you're right, going to be talked about and discussed in the bylaws changes, but I would like to have a conversation about it. And I guess if it's just the two of us who would like to do that, there's at least two of us.
And Susan, just for clarification, the conversation that you're having on Monday, did you say, at the bylaw committee meeting? Can you just clarify for us how that would be different from the conversation at a board meeting that is being requested?
What we're doing at the bylaws meeting is talking about bylaws, proposed changes. We're kind of moving into also then talking about regulations, and other board members have certainly been welcome to participate. So that's a much broader conversation. I think that, I mean, I can't speak for Don, but I think what he's referencing is that we discuss, I think there's confusion about, do we have a general counsel of the board, or is that general counsel for the organization? I would like clarification about that. And it seems like there's different definitions of that. And it doesn't have to be long, but it just would provide some, at least for my part, clarity that I would feel grateful to have the conversation.
Dawn, is that the same type of conversation you're looking to accomplish?
Probably so. I mean, I can't get into the minds of all others who are upset about it. And I'm sorry, Emily's not here tonight. I mean, she was expressing some interest in this as well. And I wasn't sure exactly how this procedure would work. I mean, talked about it some, and it's part of our process right now of figuring out, okay, what happens in the future? Can we put just a clause in our bylaws so that we know what happens? Or do we have to work through an emergency situation and then, well, we all know what happened in the past. We don't want to rehash that at all. But if we can make it clearer now so that the new general manager doesn't have to deal with it, it's all kind of in the past and taken care of. But as long as there's still something unsettling about it, then it's worth another few minutes of discussion. So I would hope it could be on the agenda for or maybe it can be solved in the bylaws thing, and then next time we put it on the agenda, we'll all be happy with that. I don't know.
Gino or Pete or Mark, any response?
Michelle's hand is up.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle. Oh, and then Pete after Michelle.
I'm still a little unclear if all we're looking for is some clarification around the general counsel's role as it relates to both the board and the district. You know, that to me is just kind of an explanation of what that looks like. But I don't want to get into that conversation and have a different outcome in mind that we're not talking about tonight. I don't want to have a conversation that hangs on history and doesn't move us forward in just a way that helps us all understand what that relationship looks like and what our role is in making changes to that relationship. And I think, you know, as we have discussed in our bylaws review committee meetings, we definitely want to address that. And there is some work being done to place that in the procurement policy. And I don't know, Mark, if you want to expand on that right now, or just let it be known that that is a discussion that we're having, because we do understand that it is a concern and one that, you know, we need to make sure we're aware of moving forward.
Yeah, I think the change in the contractual relationship is different than what they're talking about, which is the role of the general counsel and you know, who they actually represent, I guess. And so, you know, so those are, I think, two different discussions. And so, you know, I think the contractual one we can deal with in the procurement policy. The other one, I mean, you know, it's really up to the board. I mean, you know, we've kind of explained it several ways, but I don't know.
Would it be helpful at all if folks were to go back and listen to the conversation from the board retreat so we can remember kind of what some of the concerns were shared and what that discussion was? Would that be helpful at all to folks?
I guess I wasn't expecting we were having the conversation tonight. I think that what was being requested is that it be on the agenda for a future meeting.
I agree, Susan, but I think all of us, well, not all of us, excuse me, I shouldn't speak for others. I know I'm not clear as to what is being requested. So I think we're just trying to flesh out what that is. Pete, do you want to go? Your hand is up.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. So as Mark alluded to, and I completely agree that there's actually two different issues here, and I believe that I've been very closely following the bylaw discussion, watching all your meetings, and taking notes and everything. And I actually think the procurement issue and how you're putting it, trying to work with that in the bylaws, I think kind of looks towards how we're going to do it in the next steps. And if we want to really drill down on that in a future board meeting to make sure that everybody's in agreement, that's fine with me. As far as the relationship of counsel to the board, the way I look at it is, I had a discussion about legal ethics with an attorney friend of mine, and although they don't practice this area of law, is the nuts and bolts. The end result was that, as long as the obligation of the attorney is to the organization, because that's who writes a check, is essentially, and if the attorney is getting in. And what's kind of unsaid here is that there's a clarification of whether the attorney has goes in his loyalties between the management or the board. Frankly, I don't want to have anything to do with an attorney that wants to get into that, because that's not their purview. So if you really want to drill down to that and make some policy around that, ensuring that to be truth, that's fine as an objective for me. But I agree with Caitlin and Michelle, I want a more clear objective before I vote for putting anything on the agenda.
Gino, you had your hand raised.
Yep, I do. I'd like to take this in two stages. I'd like to let the bylaws and procedures discussion go forward. If I'm 99% sure that once we complete those discussions, the issues will be resolved. If they're not resolved, then we can maybe talk about a separate meeting. But at this point in time, I'm not in favor of a separate meeting on this.
Susan?
I guess I was not asking for a separate meeting, or Don was not asking for a separate meeting, but it'd be an item on a future meeting. What's happened is we sort of discussed it now. I guess I'm curious about the fact that, do we vote as a board for agenda, things that are going to be on the agenda? Is that also the process?
Yeah, there has to be a process for board recommendation to get things on the agenda. Right. So individual board members just can't put things on the agenda. It has to be really approved by the whole board to be able to do that.
That kind of comes back to the other question I started with, was how do we, if we avoid a serial communication, then we won't have an issue on the agenda. It confuses how can this board work to satisfy the concerns of other board members if we don't have a discussion before we get into a place where it's on the agenda. We can't discuss it until it's on the agenda, but then before it gets on the agenda, we have to have some discussion. That's a part where I'm kind of nonplussed with that, because it's, if I read, or if I understand the training we've had and the discussion we've had about serial communications, it's about items that are on the agenda, that are part of what the board would be deliberating. If the board doesn't have an item on the agenda, how does it deliberate? So that's, I don't have clarity there, which I didn't feel was illegal, but I'd like to have some further discussion. I don't know, is Andrea here today? I don't know if she's on the participate.
I don't believe she's here.
You know, again, we can go through the serial communication thing, but I think I mean, that's a different issue than what we're talking about here, Don.
But is it? I've asked this a couple of times in different ways. I still, maybe it's just I'm thick-headed and I can't quite get this. But if we have an item that we have to avoid the serial communication on, we have to avoid forming a quorum, then the quorum would have to decide what goes on the agenda. But how can we decide what goes on the agenda before we have a quorum? That's, I've got competition with my dog.
Mark, I don't know if you want to respond to that, or we.
Yeah, I don't know what more I can say about that serial communication item. So, I mean, I don't know. We can, like I say, we can have training. We can talk through it then to deal with that. But Michelle has her hand up.
I guess for me, this kind of goes back to my original question as to whether we're being asked to consider this item for a future discussion on the agenda strictly as kind of an exercise to clarify the role and the relationship between the board and general counsel and how we fit into maybe, you know, changing the attorney that we're working with, or are we asking for some sort of an outcome at that meeting? Like, are we asking for something that we would deliberate on, or are we just asking to be educated?
Susan and then Dawn.
I mean, I don't want to belabor this. This is longer than any other agenda item we've had tonight. From my perspective is, Michelle, I'm not asking for an outcome. For myself, and maybe I'm the only person that has some confusion around what is the relationship of the general counsel and the board. It's very different, it seems, in my perspective now than it was when I first came on the board. And I would like to understand that. I would like to know, is that the process moving forward? How did it happen? Am I asking for an outcome with regard to changes? I'm not. I do think that we should have it more, go back to the process, which is the way it's been historically in terms of an RFP. And that's moving forward. It's certainly not going to be anything that we go back and do. But looking forward, I think that's the process that should should take place. But obviously that's not something that we would be able to have happen at a future meeting. So.
And I do hope everyone is okay with staying a little late. I think part of the importance of this conversation is also understand how we do these things as a board. So it can also be a learning experience for us. So I know you have to jump off, but please, if you can stay just till 7, that would be great. Dawn, go ahead.
I really want to follow on with what Gino said earlier, because I think, you know, perhaps in the process of the contract and the bylaws committee and stuff, we may have some resolution that would be satisfying. And, but I guess it would still be a matter of having looked at that, we'll have a discussion about accepting the changes of the bylaws. And so we'll have some more discussion about it, but that may be all that's necessary. Adding a clause or something into the contracting language or something like that might be sufficient. And so I'm kind of hoping for an outcome like that, but I really believe that we should engage the whole board in a discussion like this.
So now that we know when someone requests an agenda item that the whole board needs to vote if that agenda item comes to fruition, we can at this point vote to put this on a future agenda. But Mark, I just want to ask you if there's anything kind of additional, as in, since Dawn and Susan were more asking for educational or conversational pieces, if that would be a different, can we still fulfill that in a different opportunity, like a work session or a special training with Andrea or something like that, or Camille or you? But Mark, I just wanted to hear from you if you think we should call for a vote, or if there's any other way to just help Dawn and Susan kind of answer these questions and feel comfortable, not necessarily having to put it on the agenda item for a public meeting.
And we can always do board training, but I think seems to be more than a training issue. I mean, this seems to be what happened, how did it happen, and then what can we do about it? And so, you know, so I don't think it's training. This is, you know, just something that, you know, has been kind of out there for a while. And I guess the question of the board is, do you want to bring it again up at a future board meeting? And, you know, that, so, I mean, I guess I just take the vote and we can figure it out. The board can decide.
Okay, so thank you for that, Mark. With that, I will call for a vote to put Dawn's request for a future agenda item at a public regular board meeting. So it's just going to be yes or no, a or nay vote, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to start with Michelle Weber.
No.
Thank you, Michelle. Pete Knox.
No.
Thank you, Pete. Susan Cox.
Yes.
Thank you, Susan. Gino Grimaldi.
No.
Thank you, Gino. Don Norden.
Yes.
Thank you, Don. And then Caitlin Vargas, vote no. So we have 4 no's and 2 yeses. So thank you for that. Thank you for having that discussion. And this was good for us to start this new process of being able to do this at work sessions. And thank you all for staying later so that we could learn how to do this. And Dawn and Susan, of course, I always encourage you to reach out to Mark if there's additional questions or discussion that's need to be had, but Mark is your point of contact for that. So with that, once again, thank you so much. I will see you all at our regular board meeting, or if people wish to come at the bylaws committee meeting on Monday. And with that, our meeting is adjourned.